To what causes do you ascribe the Dungeon Master shortage?
I think there's a number of different reasons why there's a Dungeon Master shortage and a Games Master shortage as a whole. I mean, you're starting off with about a 1-to-6 ratio of Dungeon Masters to players, right? I don't necessarily understand it. I'm a forever DM and I'm very happy being a forever DM. For me, the spellbinding part of role-playing games is making up my own scenarios and watching the horror on players' faces as they realise what's going on. You know, that's what gets me off. But for others, it's inhabiting and playing a character. So yeah, we probably started off with a 1-to-6 ratio, and then you have to look at D&D as the main thing that this data is coming from. And 5th edition started off being relatively light and easy and breezy to play, but any rule system over time where you're trying to keep the money going, you know, it inevitably succumbs to bloat, where you've got all kinds of different stuff, different exceptions, different rules, and every added complication creates a cascade of secondary and tertiary further issues. So you change one thing and it changes everything else, often imperceptibly until you run into it, which over time increases the demand on the Dungeon Master or the Games Master to deal with all of these different exceptions and interactions. And the player only has to learn the rules that apply to their characters, right? So they are inevitably better focused, often more informed than the Dungeon Master, and that can lead to conflict, which doesn't lead to a fun time for necessarily anybody, particularly the Dungeon Master. So that's one aspect of it, I think. Another aspect is that across many games, including Dungeons and Dragons, there has been a devaluing of the role of the Games Master or Dungeon Master. You are not the referee anymore. You are not the final word, the last authority, whether this is with fate points or story points or whatever, allowing players to interfere in the narrative in some way or to introduce new elements, or whether it's explicitly saying that the Dungeon Master, the Games Master, is just another player at the table. So some of that is in the rules. Some of it is in the culture, I think. There's this expectation that the Dungeon Master, the Games Master, is there to provide your wish fulfillment fantasies without any particular challenges. So there's a lot of pressure to ignore what happens and emerges as a story from the game, to ignore your instincts as a Games Master, to automatically buckle when a player challenges you, because if you lay down any rules, you know, you're now a bad Dungeon Master, and it might be harder to get players in the future if you play in like a shop culture or something like that. So I think that's an aspect to it. I also think a lot of the new intake are sort of people who you used to see on Tumblr, who have their alter egos, their personas, their whatever else, their OCs, which they are possibly overly attached to. So when those run into any challenge or heaven forfend, even die in a scenario, you've struck at something that is vastly important to people. Too important, perhaps. And they feel like that's a personal attack to them. So that's quite vicious and nasty as well. And I think a lot of people in general are looking to role-playing games as a way to live out their fantasy of being their alter ego, their OC, and that's the appeal for a lot of people, rather than creating the scenarios that people are being run through. So I think the DM's role has been undermined, and while I'm anti-authoritarian, I think the DM or the GM does need to be the last word. Mechanics have undermined the role of the Games Master, and the culture has shifted to a very player-centric one, and one of wish fulfillment rather than challenge. And all of this increases the difficulty to be a dungeon master or a games master, and puts a lot of people off, or leads to much more rapid burnout. But that's just like my opinion, man.